According to the New York Times, U.S. President Donald Trump considered launching a military attack on Iran last week and was only stopped by advisors. According to official sources quoted, last Thursday, President Trump asked whether he had options to take action against Iran's main nuclear sites in the coming weeks. But his advisors warned that such action might lead to a larger conflict in the region. Some say with his term coming to an end, most probably, Trump is now eager to secure a foreign policy legacy and sabotage Biden's future policies towards Iran. What is going on here? We'll be talking to our guests in Tehran and Washington about this. Ahmed Mousavi is a professor at University of Tehran. And from Washington, D.C., we have Professor Josef Mahoney from East China Normal University. Let me go to you first, Joseph. You can't help but try to connect the dots here, right? President Trump fired the defense secretary and named Christopher Miller, a more hawkish figure, to lead the Pentagon. A couple more senior military advisors resigned as well. Is Trump preparing for war with Iran here?
Well, I think, with Esper out, and he's, trying to remove anyone who questions him publicly. But for me, the biggest indicator of a looming potential disaster is the refusal, not simply the refusal to concede the election, but the refusal to bring Biden into the daily security briefings. And by doing this, because Biden has a very different policy, he came out of the Obama administration as Obama's VP, he has a very different perspective on how to deal with Iran. And so Biden is not getting access to these briefings. Biden, therefore, is not able to question Trump publicly on these matters. And I think this is the clearest, most significant aspect for sort of a looming potential danger that we see. Above all, because, Trump has made it a cornerstone of his presidency to not only frame Biden as an existential threat to U.S. national security, but to also lump that in with the Obama administration support for the previous treaty with Iran to limit nuclear proliferation.
Professor Mousavi, in Iran, let me go to you. What do you think is going on here? I mean, what does President Trump really want to do to Iran, and why?
So ever since Trump came into power, he's been trying to pressure Iran, the so-called maximum pressure campaign, and this has been achieved through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and even military confrontation. We've had limited military confrontation between Iran and the U.S., whether it was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, or before that, the shooting down of the spy drone the Americans had sent on Iranian airspace. Nevertheless, I think what is significant here is that if Donald Trump actually decides to go ahead with striking Iran's nuclear facilities in the next 2 months, then that would be bombing the actual homeland of Iran. We have to remember that Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in Iraq. Yeah. Bombing the Iranian homeland essentially would be a very massive red line, and I think there would be very important retaliation by Iran. So I think we're moving into dangerous territory.
Yeah, like you said, Iran has also officially warned that the U.S. should not do this, saying that any action against the Iranian nation would certainly face a crushing response. That is a statement from, your foreign ministry, a standard response. Does Iran take Trump's threat seriously, or do you think it is already looking past President Trump and looking to dealing with a Biden administration? Professor Mousavi?
I think what Donald Trump will do in the next 2 months will actually be critical on. Yes, should I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Yes, so I think one of the important points here is that Donald Trump is essentially trying to sabotage any form of rapprochement between Iran and the United States before he leaves office. So aside from the military threat, he has been sanctioning Iran every few days since he lost the election to Biden. So he's trying to make it very difficult for Iran and the United States to make a new deal under the Biden administration. And in that regards, I think the next 2 months are in fact important.
Okay, Joseph, let me go to you in Washington, D.C. What's your sense of this all? Is this about Trump rallying his conservative and hawkish base and, setting the stage for perhaps his future run in 2024? Or is he simply trying to secure, a legacy of some sort for himself and his administration?
Well, I think it's a little of all of it. When Trump took office, he more or less outlined what he saw were the three major strategic threats to the United States: China, North Korea, and Iran. And after a very intensive focus on North Korea, which, by the way, produced almost no results, that's pretty much been abandoned because it turns out he really had no leverage over North Korea and no real strategic options there. I think we've seen everything that he could do to China. I don't think he has much more that he could do, otherwise he would have done it before the election. And so now I think he's left with Iran. And I think he's been positioning with respect to Iran in terms of his close relationship with Saudi Arabia, his close relationship with Netanyahu and Israel, and his push in the past week to advance $23 billion worth of advanced arms sales to the UAE. I have been looking at other things. One of the things that we saw in the past week was this unconfirmed report that Israeli agents had assassinated al-Qaeda's #2 leader in Tehran. And this was a very strange report. It was denied by the Iranian government. I don't think it was confirmed by the Israelis. But there seems to be this narrative that Trump is trying to build, or the Trump White House is trying to build, that in some way either prepares for a conflict or is preparing his allies and friends in the Middle East to go to war with Iran directly. Now, does he want to go out strong? Does he want to pander to his base at this moment when he's a lame duck? Absolutely.
Right. Professor Mousavi, in the past 4 years, like you yourself said, the Trump administration has adopted the policy of maximum pressure to force Iran back to the negotiating table and to curtail its so-called security outreach and security ambition. But did it really work? I mean, or did his hawkishness toward Iran only strengthen Iran's own hardliners?
I think his policy overall was a failure. Not only did it not bring Iran to the negotiating table to get more concessions, in fact, it has made, as you pointed out, the advocates of negotiating with the United States weaker in Iran. Because we have to remember that President Rouhani came into power in Iran 7 years ago on a mandate to improve the economy through reaching an agreement with the Americans. After Donald Trump withdrew from that deal, essentially it put a lot of pressure on the Iranian economy, and as a result, it's actually weakened the reformist movements in Iran. And I think Iran, with Biden coming into power, is not really looking at giving any concessions on the regional issues. We have to remember that regional issues have nothing to do with the NPT and with the IAEA, and as a result, Iran sees that as a totally separate issue. And if anything, they will only negotiate on the nuclear matters.
And now I would like to ask both of you about your hopes and your expectations for a Biden administration's policy towards Iran. Joseph, why don't I start with you?
Well, as Mr. Mousavi noted a moment ago, Trump is trying to make it so that there's almost no way to go forward, at least in the near term, with Iran. Presidents hope to cement their legacy. Trump did everything he could to destroy Obama's legacy, and Biden was part of that. Biden, I think, will try to go back to some sort of agreement, but Iran has said that things today is not yesterday. And it's not simply a matter of going back to where we were, but you owe us. You owe us for all the sanctions. And I think this is going to be a real difficult point moving forward.
But Professor Mousavi, let's not forget Biden said that he's willing to go back to the JCPOA, right?
Yes, so if actually Biden does decide to go back to the JCPOA, Iran's foreign minister has publicly stated that Iran will also fully comply with its side of the deal. What I'm really hoping is that Biden does this quickly when he comes into power. We have to remember that the 4 years of the Trump administration has brought a lot of mistrust among Iranian elites regarding the United States and whether any sort of agreement with them will actually be fruitful. So when Biden comes into power in on January 20th, he's going to have a lot on his plate. I mean, there is the COVID pandemic, there are foreign issues like relations with China, and perhaps the JCPOA is not on the most important list. Nevertheless, I hope that he does decide to go back to the nuclear agreement quite quickly, and hopefully that will build the positive atmosphere necessary to negotiate and reach an agreement on other issues as well.
And you think Tehran will be open to working with a more, let's say, cooperative administration of the U.S.?
I think that will a lot depend on who will be Iran's next president. We have the Iranian presidential elections in less than 7 months, and as I indicated, the reformists are quite weak in the sense that they weren't able to deliver on their economic promises. So it will depend on who the next administration in Tehran will be, and that will affect how Iran's relationship with the Biden administration is going to build up.
Indeed, there are domestic politics, like it or not, everywhere you turn. Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed Mousavi at the University of Tehran and Professor Josef Mahoney at East China Normal University. And with that, that will do it for this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Wang Wen in Beijing. Thank you for watching.